She had learned to hear his footsteps before the knock came. Snow pressed against the cottage windows in soft, breathless sheets, turning the whole valley white and silent, and Alara Venn stood with one hand on the iron latch, while her 7-year-old son slept behind the curtain with a wooden wolf clutched against his chest. The Alpha King had come at last, not with soldiers, not with banners, not with the thunder of conquest, with mud on his boots, frost in his dark hair, and one knee already bending before her door. For 7 winters, Ilara had imagined him standing over her. She had never imagined him kneeling. The cottage was too small for a king's shadow, its rafters were low, its hearthstones cracked, its table scarred by knife marks and porridge burns, and the careful repairs of a woman who had learned to mend everything because no one else would. A chipped blue mug sat beside the stove, still warm from nettle tea. A child's boot lay overturned near the threshold, one lace missing. Beside it, a basket of folded wool shirts waited for the morning, because morning always came whether the heart was ready for it or not. Ilara had built her life out of such things. Small things, necessary things. She had not been born powerful, not in any way the elders measured power. She had no royal blood that anyone had cared to record, no father whose name opened doors, no mother whose death had become a song. She had been born in the northern border village of Fenmere, where the wind smelled of pine resin and sheep lanolin, and where a girl learned early that softness was not the same as weakness if she knew when to hide it. She had been a seamstress once. That was what people remembered if they remembered her at all. Ilara with the steady hands. Ilara, who could patch a winter coat so cleanly that the tear became almost invisible. Ilara, who listened more than she spoke, who carried baskets for old women, who lowered her gaze when alphas rode through the village, not because she feared them, but because she understood that wolves with crowns often mistook attention for invitation. She was not a woman who panicked. Even when the first signs of the bond had woken beneath her skin 7 years ago, silver-hot and impossible, she had not panicked. Even when Kael Draven, the young war prince who would one day take the high throne, had looked at her as though the earth had shifted under him, she had not panicked. Even when he left before dawn, with war horns calling from the southern pass, and no promise given, no vow spoken, no mark placed at her throat, she had stood in the courtyard of the healer's house, with her shawl clutched around her shoulders, and watched the last of his riders vanish into the sleet. Not abandoned, she had told herself then, called away, not discarded, unclaimed. There was a difference, until there was not. By the time her son was born, the whole kingdom had learned to call Kael Draven by another name. The Iron Wolf, the Alpha King, the ruler who broke the mountain rebellion in one winter, who tore the crown from his uncle's bloodied hand, who ended 3 border wars and made the river packs bend without burning a single village. Men said his wolf was black as stormwater and large enough to drag a stag down by the spine. Women lowered their voices when they spoke of him, as though even his name could enter a room before his body did. Children in Fenmere dared one another to whisper it near wells at night. Kael Draven does not beg. Kael Draven does not forgive. Kael Draven does not return for what he leaves behind. Ilara had believed the last one most of all. Then, 3 nights before the 7th winter moon, her sun shifted for the first time. It happened while she was cutting turnips. A simple sound came first. A small, pained breath from behind the curtain, where Rowan had been lining up pine cones on the floor and naming them soldiers. Ilara looked up with the knife still in her hand, and the air changed, not grew colder, sharper. As if every nail in the cottage walls had turned toward the child at once. "Rowan?" He did not answer. The knife slipped from her fingers and struck the table with a wooden thud. She crossed the room before her mind had time to form the fear properly, swept the curtain aside, and found her son curled on his side, both hands pressed against his chest, his face pale beneath the scatter of dark hair on his brow. "Mama," he whispered. That was all. Then his bones moved. Ilara dropped to her knees. She had seen children shift before, border-born pups with pack mothers surrounding them, and elder wolves singing low through the change. But Rowan had no pack mothers, no elder wolves, no circle of steady bodies to hold him through the first tearing of one shape into another. He had only her hands, which had once been praised for their neat stitches and now shook as she gathered him into her lap. "Look at me," she said, though his eyes had already gone gold. "Rowan, look at me, breathe with me. It hurts. I know. You don't know." "No," she said, and pressed her cheek to his hair. "But I am here." The first shift in a royal-blooded pup was not like the shift of ordinary wolves. She knew that from rumor, from old wives' warnings, from a healer who had once refused to meet her eyes after examining the newborn's heartbeat. Royal blood did not unfold gently. It arrived like a command. Rowan screamed once, and outside, every dog in Fenmere began to howl. By dawn, the whole village knew. By noon, the elders came. They arrived in a line of gray wool and fur collars, smelling of wet leather and fear disguised as authority. Elder Merrick stood at the front, his beard combed into two narrow points, his cane tapping the cottage floor, as if her house were some public hall he had a right to measure. Ilara stood between them, and the bed where Rowan slept beneath 3 blankets. Exhausted, human again, one small hand still curled around the wooden wolf she had carved for him from birch during his 3rd winter. "No," she said before Merrick finished speaking. His pale eyes narrowed. "You have not heard the terms. I heard enough when you said the word transfer. It is not a punishment. Then do not speak of taking my son as if he were grain owed to a storehouse." A younger elder shifted uncomfortably. Someone near the doorway muttered that she should lower her voice. Ilara did not lower it. Merrick's cane stopped tapping. "The boy is not merely your son," he said. "If what we saw last night is true, he is royal issue. Unregistered, unacknowledged, untrained. That makes him dangerous to himself and to every person in this village. He is 7. He cracked the wellstone with a fever cry. Ilara looked toward the window. Beyond the frost-blurred glass, half the village had gathered in the lane. She could see faces turned toward her cottage, mouths hidden behind scarves, eyes bright with the cruel relief of people whose own homes were not being entered. "He will learn control," she said. "Not from you." The words landed softly. That made them worse. Ilara folded her hands in front of her apron so no one would see her fingers curl. Merrick leaned closer, lowering his voice in a way that pretended kindness. "You have done what you could. No one denies that. But a seamstress cannot raise a king-blood wolf alone." A seamstress! There it was, the old shape they had kept for her. The small one. The harmless one. They had allowed her grief because it stayed quiet. They had allowed her child because he had been thin, and watchful, and more human than wolf. They had allowed her silence, because silence was easy to mistake for obedience. Ilara thought about the cracked wellstone. She thought about Rowan's small body twisting in her arms. She thought about Cale Draven kneeling in no one's memory. Then she said, "Who sent you?" Merrick's mouth tightened. No one answered quickly enough. Ilara looked from face to face, and the truth, when it came, did not arrive as a revelation. It arrived as a taste, bitter and metallic. "The High Court knows," she said. "The High Court suspects," Merrick corrected. "And you wrote to them. We were required. You were afraid. We were responsible. Not responsible. Afraid." She nearly said it aloud, but Rowan stirred behind her, a small restless sound escaping his throat, and every elder in the room looked toward the bed as though a blade had been drawn. Ilara stepped back into their line of sight. "No one touches him." Merrick exhaled through his nose. "By the old law, the king has the right to examine any unclaimed royal-born child. Then let the king come himself." The room went still. Even the wind seemed to pause at the seams of the cottage. One of the elders gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Woman, do you know what you are asking?" Ilara lifted her chin. "I am not asking." For a moment, Merrick only stared at her, and in that moment, she saw something almost like respect move behind his annoyance. It was faint. It did not soften him, but it was there. You would summon the Alpha King to a border cottage? If he wants my son, he knows where the door is. You presume much for a woman he never claimed. The old wound opened without drama. No blood, only cold. Alara walked to the table, picked up the fallen knife, wiped the blade on a cloth, and set it precisely beside the turnips. I presume nothing, she said. That is why I have survived. They left before dusk, but not before Merrick placed a red wax seal on her doorframe, marking the cottage under temporary royal review. Every villager saw it. Every villager pretended not to stare. That evening, no one came to trade for mending. No one sent bread. No neighbor knocked to ask after the boy. Only Mara Thorne arrived after nightfall, as she always did when the village decided cowardice was wisdom. Mara was old in the way pine roots were old, twisted and stubborn, and not yet finished with the earth. She had been a midwife, then a bone setter, then something like a healer when people needed healing, and something like a witch when they needed someone to blame. She carried a basket under one arm and a temper under the other. "Move," she said, when Alara opened the door. Alara stepped aside. Mara entered in a gust of snow and chimney smoke, shook flakes from her hood, and set the basket on the table. "There's rabbit stew, 2 loaves, fever tea, and a little jar of mountain honey I stole from Baron, because he overcharges widows. I am not a widow." "No," Mara said, unwrapping her scarf. "Widows get more sympathy." Alara almost smiled. Almost. Mara glanced toward the curtain. "He asleep? For now. Any fever? Some. Teeth? Only once. Claws?" Alara hesitated. Mara's eyes sharpened. "Show me." There was no point pretending. Alara took the chipped blue mug from the shelf and turned it in her hands. 4 narrow scratches marked the glaze where Rowan had gripped it that morning and tried to apologize for being thirsty. Mara touched the marks with one thick finger. "Royal," she muttered. Alara closed her eyes. "I know." "No," Mara said, not unkindly. "You hoped. That is different." The cottage settled around them with its winter creaks and soft ash noises, and for the first time since the elders left, Alara felt the shape of exhaustion inside her, vast and hollow. Mara moved to the hearth and stirred the coals. "You told Merrick to fetch the king." "I told him if the king wants Rowan, he can come himself." "That is not the same thing, but close enough to get you killed." "He will not kill me." "You sound very certain." Alara looked toward the bed curtain. Behind it, Rowan murmured in his sleep. "I am not certain of anything." Mara studied her for a long moment, the firelight cutting deep lines into her face. "You still love him?" Alara's answer came too quickly. "No." Mara said nothing. Alara pressed her palm against the table edge until the wood bit into her skin. "Not love," she said more quietly. "Memory." Mara gave a low grunt. "That is worse. Love can be fed or starved. Memory sits in the corner and chews bones." Alara did smile then, but it hurt. Mara filled the kettle, set it over the coals, and moved with the blunt ownership of someone who had delivered half the village and buried the other half. "Listen to me. If Cale Draven comes, he will not come as the boy's father. Men like that do not know how. He will come as a king first, a wolf second, and whatever he was to you, a distant third." "He was nothing to me." Liar. The word was not cruel. That made it harder to bear. Alara turned away and folded one of Rowan's shirts from the basket, smoothing the sleeves, though they were already smooth. "He left before I knew I was carrying." "And after?" He did not know. Mara's silence changed. Alara looked up. "You never sent word?" Mara asked. "No." "Alara. He was at war. He was alive. He had a throne to take. He had a son to know." The words struck the room and stayed there. Alara set the shirt down with careful hands. "I was 19, she said. "He was a prince with half the kingdom hunting him, and the other half begging him to save it. What was I supposed to do?" walk into the high court with a swelling belly, and say the war prince had held my hand in a healer's garden for 3 nights, that he had looked at me as though I was something the world had not yet ruined, that he had left without a promise because the horns called and I was too proud to ask for one? Her voice had risen. She lowered it because Rowan slept. Mara did not soften. You were supposed to protect yourself. I did. No. You hid. Alara stared at her. Mara crossed the room and took both of Alara's hands between her rough palms. You hid well. You hid bravely. You hid because sometimes hiding is the only door left. But the door is open now, girl, whether you like the weather outside or not. Alara looked down at their joined hands. Her own hands were still young, though some mornings she felt ancient. There were needle marks along the pads of her fingers, and a burn scar near her wrist from the winter Rowan had nearly pulled the stew pot down. Hands of a seamstress, hands of a mother, hands that had held a royal wolf through his first breaking. What if he takes him? She whispered. Mara's grip tightened. Then you become more difficult than grief. Outside, the wind struck the door hard enough to make the red seal tremble. On the 3rd night after Rowan's shift, the wolves came before the king did. Alara heard them beyond the pines, not howling, not hunting, only moving. A pack's silence was different from ordinary silence. It had weight. It listened back. Rowan was awake, sitting on the floor near the hearth, wrapped in a blanket with his knees drawn up and the wooden wolf in his lap. His fever had broken that morning, leaving him pale and solemn, his gold eyes fading in and out when he forgot to breathe evenly. Mama, he said. I hear them. Are they coming for me? Alara crossed to him and knelt. No one comes for you without going through me. He considered this with the grave suspicion of a child who had learned too early that adults could say comforting things without making them true. Are you stronger than them? No. His mouth trembled. Alara brushed the hair back from his forehead. But I am more stubborn. That earned half a smile. Then the knock came. Not loud. Not royal. 3 slow strikes against the old wood. Every candle flame in the cottage leaned toward the door. Alara rose. Her legs felt steady, which seemed strange. Her hands did not shake. There was no great rush of feeling, no swoon, no collapse into the girl she had been when Cale Draven's thumb once brushed rain from her cheek beneath the healer's eaves. She was not that girl anymore. She lifted the latch. The door opened inward. Cale Draven stood on her threshold with winter gathered on his shoulders. For one suspended breath, he was not the alpha king of stories. He was only a man shaped by 7 years of war and rule, broader than memory, harder at the mouth, his black hair threaded with frost, his eyes the same impossible winter gray that had haunted her son's face in certain moods since infancy. Behind him, 6 royal wolves waited in the snow, their cloaks dark, their heads bowed enough to show discipline but not enough to hide the tension in their bodies. Beyond them, horses steamed in the lane. Half the village watched from shutter cracks. Cale looked at Alara, then past her. Rowan stood by the hearth, blanket slipping from one shoulder, gold flickering in his eyes. The king's face changed. Only once, only slightly, but Alara saw it, because she had once known the unguarded version of him, and the difference was not small to her. He took one step into the cottage. Alara blocked him. His gaze returned to hers. Alara. Her name in his voice was the first cruel thing he had done that night. Not because he spoke it harshly, because he remembered how. She held the door with one hand. Your Majesty. Something moved in his jaw. Behind him, one of the wolves shifted, offended on his behalf. Cale lifted 2 fingers without looking back, and the man went still. I received word of a royal blood child in Fenmere, Cale said. Then the elders write quickly when frightened. They wrote late. Alara absorbed that. Late meant suspicion before Rowan's shift. Late meant someone had watched. Late meant silence had not protected them as well as she thought. Cale's eyes moved again to Rowan, and this time the boy stepped behind the chair but did not run. What is his name? Cale asked. Alara's fingers tightened around the latch. You came to examine him without knowing his name? Pain crossed his face so quickly she might have missed it if she had wanted to. She did not want to. Tell me, he said. No. The cottage seemed to shrink around the word. Kale looked back at her fully. The power in him was not dramatic. That was what frightened most people, she thought. There was no visible storm, no theatrical growl, no need to prove his dominance by filling the room with it. His authority rested in him like a blade resting in its sheath, and every wolf outside knew exactly how quickly it could be drawn. But Alara had held a screaming child through the breaking of his bones. A king's silence did not impress her as much as it might have once. You may enter, she said, if you leave your men outside. His brows lowered. Alara, and you will not touch him unless he allows it. He may be unstable. He is 7. He is royal. He is mine. The last word came out before she could soften it. Kale went very still, not angry, struck. Alara hated that she noticed the difference. Behind the chair, Rowan whispered, Mama? She did not turn. It is all right. Kale heard the boy's voice and closed his eyes for half a breath, as if sound had become a physical thing pressing into him. When he opened them, he looked at Alara with something she had no wish to name. I will leave my guard outside, he said. I will not touch him without permission. She stepped aside. Kale entered the cottage. The room changed around him. Not because he meant it to, perhaps, but because he belonged to halls and blood oaths and winter courts, not to low rafters and patched blankets and the smell of turnip stew. His cloak brushed the floor near Rowan's missing bootlace. His shoulder nearly touched the hanging herbs. Snow melted from his hair and fell in small drops onto her worn boards. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Rowan, who had inherited none of his mother's sense for self-preservation when curiosity took him, peered around the chair and asked, Are you the king? Kale lowered himself slowly to one knee. Ilara's breath caught. Outside, one of the wolves made a sound that was almost protest. Kale ignored it. Yes, he said. Rowan considered him. Kings don't come to cottages. This one did. Why? Kale looked at Alara. She gave him nothing. He looked back at the boy. Because I should have come sooner. The words were quiet. They were not enough. Alara felt that with a clarity so sharp it steadied her. Not enough to fill 7 winters. Not enough to explain fever nights, hunger months, the way Rowan had once asked whether fathers were only something other children had. Not enough for the tiny boots she had mended 3 times, because new leather cost more than pride allowed. But they were not nothing. Rowan's fingers tightened around the wooden wolf. Do you know my name? Kale swallowed. No. My name is Rowan. Kale bowed his head. Not to the air. Not to the blood. To the child. Rowan, he said, and the name sounded different in his mouth, as if it had entered the kingdom's history simply by being spoken there. I am Kale. I know. Everyone knows. A faint shadow touched Kale's mouth. Not quite a smile. Alara looked away. She could not afford to see him soften. Kale's gaze shifted to the wooden wolf. Did your mother make that? Rowan nodded. It has one crooked ear. I see that. She said wolves don't need to be perfect to bite. Kale looked up at Alara. This time, despite herself, she remembered. Rain in the healer's garden. A young prince bleeding through his bandage, laughing under his breath because she had scolded him for reopening the wound. Wolves do not need to be pretty to survive, she had told him then, tying the cloth tighter than necessary. He had remembered, or perhaps she had. Both felt dangerous. Kale rose slowly. He must come to Blackthorn Keep. No, Alara said. Rowan flinched. Kale turned to her. He needs training. He needs safety. The two are not separate. They become separate when men use one as an excuse to steal the other. His eyes hardened. I am not here to steal him. Then why are there horses in my lane? Because the High Court already knows enough to move against him if I do not. The heir left the cottage. Alara said nothing. Kale stepped closer, keeping his voice low so Rowan would not hear all of it, though of course Rowan heard everything. Children always did when adults tried to hide fear. There are laws for unacknowledged royal blood, Kale said. Old laws, cruel ones. I can suspend them if he is under my protection. Your protection. Yes. Is that what you call it when a king takes a child from his mother? His face tightened. I am asking you to come with him. She had prepared herself for many things: threats, orders, accusations. She had not prepared for that. Behind her, the kettle began to tremble on the hook, not yet boiling, only gathering heat. Elara looked at the man she had once loved, without permitting herself the mercy of the word. To Blackthorn Keep, she said. Yes. As what? Kale did not answer quickly. There it was, the blade beneath the cloth. Elara gave a small nod. No. Elara. No. Listen to me. I have listened to men explain necessity for 7 years. It always sounds nobler in their mouths than it feels in my life. His gaze flickered, and for the first time, anger moved through him with enough force for the room to feel it. The candles bent low. Rowan's eyes flashed gold. Elara stepped toward her son. Kale saw it, and pulled the power back so violently his own breath hitched. I am not your enemy, he said. No, she replied. You are something more difficult. The words settled between them. Kale looked tired then, though no song in the kingdom mentioned that. The Iron Wolf was not supposed to look tired in a seamstress's cottage, with melted snow on his collar, and regret caught like a thorn in his throat. There are counselors who will question his legitimacy, he said. Rivals who will call him a threat, packs that will try to use him. If I leave him here, they will come after I go. If I take him without you, you will hate me, and he will learn to. If I bring you both, I can keep the law from closing around his neck before he is old enough to understand it. Elara thought about Merrick's red seal on the doorframe. She thought about the villagers watching from behind shutters. She thought about Rowan trying not to cry because he had cracked a mug. Then she said, I have conditions. Kale's eyes lifted to hers. For a breath, he looked almost relieved. Name them. I stay with my son. Always. No separate chambers unless I choose them. No tutors, healers, counselors, or priests examine him without me present. Granted. You do not announce him to the court until I have seen where he will sleep, who will guard him, and what laws you intend to place over him. Kale hesitated. Elara's face did not change. Granted, he said. If anyone calls him bastard in my hearing, I will not wait for royal permission to answer. A strange expression crossed his face. Granted. And you do not touch the bond. The cottage went silent in a different way. Rowan looked between them, not understanding. Kale did. His voice lowered. Elara. No claiming mark. No forced recognition. No old ritual dressed as protection. Whatever happened between us, whatever the bond is or was or thinks it does not become another chain around my throat because the court finds it convenient. He stared at her. She had expected argument. Instead, he said, Granted. The ease of it unsettled her more than resistance would have. Say it properly, she said. Kale inclined his head. I will not touch the bond without your consent. And Rowan? I will not use him to reach you. There. That was the answer she had not known she needed until it entered the room. Elara looked away first, not in surrender, in survival. Rowan came out from behind the chair, blanket dragging around his feet. Mama, are we leaving? Elara turned to him, and the sight of his small face nearly undid her. Not fear alone. Hope too, that was the cruel part. Children could hope in the middle of ruin if someone opened a door and called it elsewhere. She knelt and brushed lint from his sleeve. For a while, she said. Can I bring my wolf? Yes. My pine cones. 2. All of them are soldiers. Then choose the bravest. He looked gravely toward the row of pine cones near the hearth, already accepting loss as a matter of packing. Elara stood before her knees could fail. Kale watched her as if she were the one impossible thing in the room. She did not look at him. Packing took less time than a life should. 2 dresses. Rowan's shirts. Wool stockings. the wooden wolf. 3 pine cones because Rowan slipped the third into his pocket, and Alara pretended not to see. The chipped blue mug, wrapped in cloth and tucked into the basket because she refused to drink from silver, in a place that might not know what hands were for. Mara arrived as Alara was tying the bundle. She took one look at Cale Draven, standing beside the cold hearth, and did not bow. "Your Majesty," she said, in a tone that suggested the title was a diagnosis. Cale inclined his head. "Mistress Thorne. Still alive then." So far, Mara's eyes narrowed, perhaps because she had not expected an answer. Then she turned her full attention to Alara. "You going?" "For Rowan. That is how all cages are sold." Cale said nothing. Alara tied the knot tighter. "I gave conditions." "Good. Give more when those become inconvenient." Mara crossed to Rowan and crouched with effort. Her knees cracked loudly. She took his face in both hands. "You listen to your mother," she said. Rowan nodded. "You bite no one unless they deserve it." "Mara." "What?" "Boys should have principles." Rowan's mouth curved despite the fear. Mara kissed his forehead, then rose and pressed a small packet into Alara's palm. "Fever bark, moon salt, needle and black thread. The thread is for court clothes, not wounds, unless the court gets interesting." Alara closed her fingers around it. "Thank you." Mara's expression shifted, and for one moment the bluntness fell away, revealing the grief beneath it. "You send word," she said. "Any word. Blank paper if you must. I will know it means you are alive." Alara nodded, because speaking would cost too much. Outside, the village had gathered openly now. Shame had never kept people from spectacle for long. They stood in doorways and along fences, wrapped in shawls, watching the seamstress and her wolf-born son walk out under royal guard. Merrick was there. Of course he was. His eyes moved from Alara's bundle to Cale's face, calculating the shape of whatever future might punish him least. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low. Cale looked at the red seal on Alara's doorframe, then at Merrick. "Remove it." Merrick blinked. "Sire?" "The seal." At once. The elder reached for the wax with stiff fingers, but Cale stepped past him and tore it down himself. The red disc snapped in half in his hand. The sound was small. Alara felt it in her ribs. Cale let the pieces fall into the snow. No speech followed, no punishment, no grand defense of her honor before the villagers who had offered none. Only that, it was worse, somehow. Better. She did not know. The journey to Blackthorn Keep began before dawn fully broke. Alara rode in a covered sleigh, with Rowan pressed against her side, the basket at her feet, and a fur blanket over their knees that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. Cale rode ahead on a black horse large enough to look carved from the same night that still clung to the edges of the sky. His guard formed a loose ring around them, silent but watchful, their breath rising in pale streams. Fenmir disappeared behind the pines without ceremony. Rowan fell asleep after the first hour, his cheek against Alara's arm, one hand hidden inside his coat pocket around the stolen pine cone. Alara watched the road unfurl through the sleigh's front opening, watched snow gather in the dark seams of the forest, watched the world she knew become smaller with every bend. She had never traveled farther than the spring market at Bellwater. Now the kingdom opened around her in layers. Frozen marshland silvered beneath the morning light. Narrow bridges groaned under the horses. Villages appeared and vanished, each with its own smoke, its own dogs, its own staring children who recognized the royal crest and dropped into clumsy bows. At midday, they passed a shrine of antlers hung with blue ribbons. The old kind, from before the High Court had polished every rough belief into law. One of the guards touched 2 fingers to his brow as they passed. Cale did not look back often. When he did, Alara pretended not to notice. By evening, the hills rose into black stone ridges, and the air grew colder, cleaner, edged with iron. The trees changed too, pines giving way to ancient black firs whose branches bent under snow, like old wolves lowering their heads. Rowan woke near sunset. "Is that it?" he whispered. Alara followed his gaze. Blackthorn Keep stood on the mountain shoulder above them, half fortress, half crown, its dark towers cut into the red winter sky. Smoke lifted from dozens of chimneys, windows burned gold in the stone. The outer walls were draped with frost, but beneath the frost, black rock showed through, veined with something pale that caught the last light like bone. It did not look like a palace from children's stories. It looked like a place built to survive siege, grief, and kings who did not sleep. As they approached, the gates opened without a sound. That was the first thing Alara noticed. Something that large should have groaned, should have announced itself. Instead, iron parted from iron, in a silence so complete it seemed enchanted or well cared for, and both possibilities unsettled her. Inside the walls, the courtyard smelled of horse sweat, pine pitch, hot metal, and bread baking somewhere deep within the keep. Wolves moved everywhere with purpose, guards changing watch, servants carrying wood, stable boys leading horses, women in dark gowns crossing the snow with baskets under their arms. No one stared openly, but everyone saw. The sleigh stopped before a flight of shallow stone steps. Kale dismounted before anyone could help him and came to the sleigh himself. Alara gathered Rowan close. Kale noticed. Of course he did. He offered no hand to her. Instead, he stepped back, leaving space. That, more than courtesy, persuaded her to climb down without refusing the ground. The cold struck immediately through her boots. Rowan slipped once on the icy stone, and Kale moved, a reflex so fast Alara barely saw it. He stopped before touching the boy. Rowan caught himself on Alara's sleeve. Kale's hand remained suspended for half a breath before he lowered it. Alara hated the part of herself that softened at restraint. A woman waited at the top of the steps. She was tall, silver-haired, and severe, dressed in dark green wool with keys hanging at her waist. Her face had the calm authority of someone who ran the household of dangerous men and feared none of them because she knew where all the clean linens were kept. "Lady Alara," she said. Alara almost corrected the title. Almost. Kale spoke first. "This is Sarah Vale, keeper of Blackthorn House." Sarah bowed her head, not too low. "Your rooms are prepared." "My rooms are with my son," Alara said. Sarah's eyes flicked once to Kale, then back. "Yes, my lady. A connecting chamber, as ordered." As ordered. So he had listened. Alara did not thank him. They entered the keep. Warmth met them in a great breath. Not the close, smoky warmth of her cottage, but a deep, stone-held heat that rose from floors and hearths and unseen pipes in the walls. The entrance hall stretched high above them, ribbed with black beams, its walls hung with old banners in muted colors, ash gray, winter blue, blood-dark red. The floor was polished slate, worn in the center by generations of boots. Somewhere above, water moved through copper channels with a soft, steady ticking. Rowan tilted his head back, so far Alara touched his shoulder to steady him. "There are trees inside," he whispered. "Not trees. Pillars carved like trunks, their stone branches climbing to meet the ceiling." "Yes," Alara said. "I see." Kale watched the boy see his inheritance and looked as if it hurt. Sarah led them through corridors lit by amber lamps. The keep smelled of beeswax, old wool, and the faint mineral scent of snowmelt evaporating from stone. Servants stepped aside as they passed. Some bowed, some glanced at Rowan and looked quickly away. Alara counted exits, one stairwell down, 2 windows too narrow for escape, a side passage toward kitchens, warm-smelling and crowded, 3 guards at the inner arch. Old habits did not disappear because the walls became grand. At last, Sarah opened a carved oak door into a chamber larger than Alara's entire cottage. Rowan stopped on the threshold. Alara did too. A fire burned in a wide hearth. 2 beds stood apart, but near enough that a child waking afraid could see his mother before fear grew teeth. Heavy curtains framed windows overlooking the snowy inner garden. A smaller door stood open to a washing room where copper pipes gleamed, and beside the fire sat a low table with bread, butter, sliced apples, roasted chicken, and a pot of tea that smelled sharply of mint. On the mantel, someone had placed a small wooden bowl filled with pine cones. Alara looked at Kale. He stood behind them, expression unreadable. "I thought," he said, then stopped. Not finished, only stopped. Rowan crossed the room slowly, as though expecting it to vanish, and touched the bowl with one finger. "These are better soldiers," he said. Alara's throat tightened. "No," she managed, "just better fed." Kale looked away. Sarah cleared her throat gently. "The inner door locks from your side, Lady Alara. His Majesty's rooms are in the east wing. No one enters here without your permission except myself, and only if summoned or in emergency." Alara absorbed every word. "Who guards the hall?" she asked. "Two of the king's personal guard. They answer to him." "Then they do not answer to me," Kale said. "They will." She turned. He met her eyes. "Within these doors, your word governs access to Rowan." Sarah's face did not change, but something in her stillness suggested this was no small concession. Alara nodded once. "Then I want their names." Kale looked toward the hallway. "Tavin and Holt. I will meet them." "Now?" "Yes." A faint breath moved through Sarah. Approval, perhaps. Kale stepped aside and called the guards in. They were both large, as royal wolves tended to be, but one had kind brown eyes and a scar through his eyebrow, while the other looked young enough to still resent being awake. Alara stood before them in her travel-worn dress with Rowan behind her and the Alpha King at her side, and she did not try to sound grand. "My son sleeps here," she said. "No one enters without my permission, not counselors, not healers, not priests, not curious nobles, not even the king, unless I say so or Rowan asks for him. Do you understand?" The younger one blinked. The scarred one bowed. "Yes, my lady." Alara looked at the younger. He straightened. "Yes, my lady. If someone orders you otherwise?" Tavin, the scarred one, glanced at Kale. Kale said nothing. Tavin looked back at her. "We refuse." "And if they outrank you?" Holt, the younger one, swallowed. "We refuse louder." Rowan laughed softly. It was the first true laugh Alara had heard from him since the shift. The sound altered the room. Kale heard it too. She knew because his eyes closed briefly, as if he were receiving a wound he had earned. "Good," Alara said. "Thank you." The guards left. Sarah followed after explaining the bell pull, the bathing water, the meal schedule, and a dozen other details Alara only half retained. The door closed at last, leaving Alara, Rowan, and Kale in the chamber, with the fire and the pine cones and all the years none of them knew how to cross. Rowan climbed onto the smaller bed and pressed both hands into the mattress. "It's soft," he said, suspiciously. "It appears so. Can I sleep on it?" "That is why it is there." "All of it?" Alara smiled despite herself. "All of it." He lay down immediately, arms spread, then sat up. "Is this our house now?" The question struck too close to the place she was trying not to touch. "For now," she said. Rowan accepted this, as children accept temporary answers when they are too tired to challenge them. He reached for a slice of apple from the tray, then paused and looked at Kale. "Do kings eat apples?" Kale answered gravely. "When permitted." Rowan held one out. Alara went still. Kale did not move at first. Then he crossed the room slowly, crouched at a careful distance, and accepted the apple slice from the child's hand without touching his fingers. "Thank you," he said. Rowan nodded with the solemn satisfaction of a host. Alara turned toward the fire before her face could betray her. Kale rose. "I will leave you to rest." "Yes," she said. He paused near the door. "Alara." She looked at him because refusing would give the name more power than hearing it. "There will be a council session tomorrow, not public. 5 elders only. I would like you present." "Would like?" His mouth curved faintly, without humor. "Request." "Then I will attend. Rowan can remain here with Sarah and the guards." "No." A pause. "Then he comes," Kale said. "You object?" I am learning not to. That should not have touched her. It did. Only lightly. Only enough to anger her. Cale opened the door, then stopped again, his hand on the iron latch. I did not know, he said. There it was. The sentence she had feared and wanted and hated in equal measure. Alara stood with firelight against her skirt and snow darkness beyond the windows. No, she said. You did not. He turned back slightly. If I had, do not. The word cut clean. His face closed. Alara's voice lowered. Do not give me the life that did not happen. I have no place to put it. For a long moment, Cale said nothing. Then he bowed his head. Not as a king, not as the Iron Wolf, as a man who had arrived 7 winters late and found no door wide enough for what he carried. Good night, he said. The door closed behind him. Rowan was already half asleep with the apple still in his hand. Alara crossed to him, took the slice gently from his fingers, and pulled the blanket over his shoulders. His hair fell across his brow in the same dark, unruly waves as Cale's after snow. She smoothed it back, and felt the old ache move through her. Quieter now, but not kinder. She thought about the cottage door. She thought about the broken red seal. She thought about the king kneeling in the snow. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Only the beginning of a road she had not chosen until every other road closed. Outside the windows, snow fell into the inner garden of Blackthorn Keep, softening the black stone, covering the tracks of wolves and horses alike, and in the wooden bowl by the hearth, the pine cones waited like small brown soldiers for morning. On the first morning at Blackthorn Keep, Alara woke before the bells. For a few breaths, she did not know where she was. The ceiling above her was too high, ribbed with dark beams instead of low smoke-stained rafters, and the air held the faint, clean scent of stone warmed from beneath, not ash and turnip peelings and old wool drying by a cottage hearth. Snowlight pressed against the curtains, pale and blue, and somewhere beyond the wall, water moved softly through pipes with a patient metallic ticking. Then Rowan sighed in his sleep. The sound brought the world back into order. Alara turned her head. He was sprawled sideways in the smaller bed, 1 foot outside the blanket, his wooden wolf on the pillow beside him, and 3 pine cones lined along the coverlet with the solemn importance of a battlefield. The room had remained undisturbed through the night. The inner latch was still set. No stranger had entered. No hand had reached for him in the dark. She lay still and listened. A palace had a different silence than a cottage. It was not emptiness, but restraint. A great beast holding its breath while hundreds of lives moved inside it. Far below, a door closed. Boots crossed stone. Someone laughed once, quickly muffled. The keep was waking around them, and she, who had spent 7 years measuring safety by whether a roof leaked and whether the woodpile would last until thaw, now had to learn the dangers of thick walls and polished floors. She rose quietly, and dressed in the same gray wool she had worn from Fenmere, smoothing the skirt with hands that felt too rough for the room. The mirror near the washing stand showed her a woman travel-worn and pale, with dark hair braided severely over one shoulder and faint shadows beneath her eyes. There was nothing queenly in her reflection, nothing courtly. Good, she thought. Let them underestimate familiar things. A knock came at the outer door. Not urgent. 2 measured taps. Rowan stirred but did not wake. Alara crossed the chamber and opened it only as far as the chain allowed. Sarah Vale stood in the corridor with a tray held by a young maid whose eyes dropped immediately to the floor. Behind them, Tavin and Holt kept watch at either end of the passage, as promised. "Breakfast, my lady," Sarah said. Alara looked past her. "Has anyone asked entry?" 3 people. Ilara's hand tightened on the door edge. Who? The court physician, the lawkeeper, Lord Carden of the Western Pax. Denied? By your instruction. Alara studied her. Sarah's silver brows lifted slightly. I was told your word governs access to the boy. I do not enjoy being told something twice. A small amount of tension left Ilara's shoulders. Bring it in. Sarah entered with the maid, who set the tray on the low table by the hearth. There was oat porridge with cream, dark bread, honey, smoked trout, sliced pears, and a pot of tea fragrant with bergamot and winter mint. No silver goblets, no ceremonial plates. The bowls were heavy white clay with blue rims, plain enough that Alara wondered who had chosen them. Sarah noticed her looking. His Majesty requested simple service. Of course he had. Alara disliked how often silence had to become an answer. Rowan woke when the smell of honey reached him, sitting up with his hair wild and one pine cone rolling into his lap. "Is that for us?" "For someone very hungry," Sarah said. "That is me." "Then fortune has found its mark." Rowan glanced at Alara for permission, and only when she nodded did he climb from the bed and approach the tray. He moved carefully, as if softness might be taken away for rough handling. Alara saw it, and felt another small, private break inside her. Sarah poured tea. "The council meets after the second bell," she said. "His Majesty asked that you and the child be escorted to the winter room." "What is a winter room?" "A chamber designed to make old men feel less cold while they say cold things." Rowan looked up from the porridge. "Are old men dangerous?" Sarah considered him gravely. "Only when they are comfortable." Alara almost laughed. Instead, she said, "We will be ready." After Sarah left, Alara sat beside Rowan and made herself eat. The porridge was good, too good, thick with cream and a ribbon of honey that reminded her of Mara's stolen jar. Rowan ate as though every spoonful required thought. "Do I have to talk to the old men?" he asked. "Only if you wish." "What if they talk to me?" "You may answer, or you may look at me, and if I don't know the answer, then say you do not know." He nodded. "Mara says men with titles hate that. Mara says many true things in ways that cause trouble." "Are we in trouble?" Alara looked at his face. At the faint gold still lingering around his pupils, at the small mouth trying to be brave because he thought bravery was payment for being protected. She reached across the table and wiped a drop of honey from his thumb with her napkin. "We are in a difficult place," she said. "That is not the same." He accepted this because she said it evenly. She wished that made it true. At the second bell, Kale came to escort them himself. Alara opened the door before he knocked a third time and found him in dark court clothes, rather than travel leathers, a black coat fastened high at the throat, no crown, no ornament except a narrow silver clasp shaped like a wolf's tooth. He looked less like a man and more like a law that had learned to breathe. Rowan peeked around her skirt. "Good morning, Rowan," Kale said. Rowan looked at the clasp. "Is that a real tooth?" "No." "Whose is it supposed to be?" "Mine, according to people who enjoy poor symbolism." Rowan frowned. "Your teeth are still in your mouth." "So far." A startled laugh escaped the boy. Alara looked at Kale sharply. He looked back with perfect innocence, which did not suit him and therefore unsettled her. "Are you ready?" he asked. "Yes." They walked through corridors where every servant stepped aside, and every noble they passed pretended not to watch too eagerly. Rowan held Alara's hand and kept his wooden wolf tucked under his free arm. Kale walked on the other side, but not too close, matching his pace to the child's shorter steps without comment. The winter room lay behind double doors, carved with antlered wolves beneath a crescent moon. Inside, a round table had been placed before a long hearth. 5 counselors waited. Alara knew their ranks from posture before names. The law-keeper sat straight as a blade, his robes ink-black, fingers folded over a stack of parchment. The physician wore dark red and smelled faintly of cloves. 2 pack lords stood near the fire, both gray-haired, both heavy with rings and inherited suspicion. The 5th was a woman with cropped white hair and one blind eye, dressed in riding leathers rather than court cloth. All 5 turned as Kale entered. Then their gazes fell to Rowan. The boy's grip tightened. Alara squeezed back once. Not warning, promise. Kale did not take the largest chair. He stood behind it, hands resting on the carved back. "You asked for review. Review him." The law-keeper cleared his throat. "Your Majesty." Standard procedure requires the child be examined privately by the court physician and lineage confirmed through scent, blood, and oath record. No, Alara said. Every face turned toward her. Kale did not. The lawkeeper looked pained, as if furniture had spoken. Lady Ven, the matter is not. It is my son, so begin again. One of the pack lords scoffed softly. Kale looked at him. The sound died. The white-haired woman smiled into her cup. The lawkeeper adjusted his parchment. Very well. The boy's identity must be established according to law. His name is Rowan Ven. Ven? The physician asked before he could stop himself. Alara looked at him. Yes. Kale's fingers tightened once on the chair. The lawkeeper continued carefully. If His Majesty recognizes the child as royal issue, the name may be altered. No, Rowan said. It was not loud, it did not need to be. Alara looked down at him, but he was staring at the lawkeeper with solemn offense. My name is Rowan Ven. The white-haired woman set her cup down with a click. Kale's eyes moved to his son. The lawkeeper opened his mouth, then seemed to reconsider the usefulness of arguing with a 7-year-old royal wolf whose eyes had begun to turn gold. Kale spoke. His name remains Rowan Ven, unless he chooses otherwise when he is grown. The lawkeeper's mouth compressed. That is irregular. So is discovering one has a son because frightened elders wrote late. Silence moved around the table. Alara did not look at him. The physician leaned forward, voice gentler. Lady Ven, no one here wishes to frighten the boy, but a first royal shift can leave dangerous pressure in the bones and blood. I can examine him with you present. No knives, no binding. I will ask permission before touching him. Alara studied the physician's hands. Clean, narrow, steady. Not unkind, but kindness in court was still court. She crouched beside Rowan. You heard him, Rowan whispered. Will it hurt? The physician answered before Alara could. Not if I can help it. Rowan considered that. That is not no. No, the physician said. It is honest. After a moment, Rowan nodded. The examination took place beside the fire, not behind closed doors. Alara stood close enough that her skirt brushed Rowan's knee. The physician checked his pulse, his pupils, the temperature along his spine, the faint silvering beneath his fingernails, where the wolf had pushed through and retreated. He asked Rowan to breathe, to grip his fingers, to follow a candle flame with his eyes. When he was done, he bowed his head. He is royal, he said, strongly. His wolf is early, but not broken. He needs training before the next moon. He also needs rest, food, routine, and no fear. The last words he directed toward the council. Alara decided she might tolerate him. The Western Lord Carden spoke then, his voice smooth as oil over cold water. No one disputes the child's needs. What concerns the Pax is succession. An unannounced heir appearing in winter, born of an unmarked woman, creates uncertainty. Alara felt Kale's power shift behind her. She spoke first. My son is not a weather event, Lord Carden. He did not appear, he lived. Carden's eyes flicked to her. In secrecy, in peace, in illegitimacy. The room changed. Not loudly, deeply. Kale moved so little an ordinary person might not notice, but every wolf in the room did. Even the fire seemed to lean away. Alara placed one hand on Rowan's shoulder. She did not need the king's anger. She had her own. Say the word again, she said quietly, and I will show your court how border women answer insults when they have no brothers to do it for them. Carden looked genuinely startled. The white-haired woman laughed once. Kale's voice entered the room like iron laid on stone. Lord Carden, you will apologize to Lady Ven and her son. Carden's face darkened. Your Majesty. Now. The Lord looked at Rowan as if apology to a child might poison him. Then he inclined his head stiffly. My words were poorly chosen. Alara said, that is not an apology. The white-haired woman laughed again, softer this time. Carden's jaw worked. I apologize, Lady Ven. Rowan. Rowan looked at his mother. Alara did not tell him what to say. After a moment, Rowan replied, Do not do it again. Kale turned his face slightly toward the window, but not before Alara saw the briefest flicker at the corner of his mouth. The council lasted nearly 2 hours. Laws were read, protections were named, threats were dressed in ceremonial language and placed carefully on the table, where Alara picked through them one by one, as if sorting bones from fish. No public announcement until after the winter moon. No separation. No claiming ritual. No blood oath. Training to begin in 3 days, first with breath and scent discipline, then controlled partial shift under supervision. The physician would visit each morning with permission. Sarah would oversee household access. Tavin and Holt would remain assigned to the door. At the end, the lawkeeper asked, "And what of Lady Ven's position?" There it was again. As what? Alara looked at Kale. This time, he did not hesitate. "Honored guest of the crown, and mother of Rowan Ven, under my personal protection," Carden murmured. "That gives her rank without title." Kale's eyes remained on Alara. "Yes. And authority without oath." "Yes. And influence without accountability." Alara answered before Kale could. "I am accountable to my son. That has proven a stricter office than most titles." The white-haired woman leaned back, openly pleased. After the council dispersed, she approached Alara near the hearth. "Branwen Ash," she said. "Northern Hunt Marshal." Alara inclined her head. "Alara Ven. I know. You made Carden sweat through wool. I admire craft. I used no craft. That is often the best kind." Branwen's single good eye moved to Rowan. "You train with me in 3 days, little wolf." Rowan pressed closer to Alara. "Are you old?" "Very. Can old people run?" From dull conversations, swiftly. He considered her with interest. Branwen glanced at Alara. "He has your suspicion." "He has his own." "Good. Suspicion keeps pups from eating pretty berries and trusting pretty nobles." She looked toward Kale, who was speaking quietly with the lawkeeper. "And kings, when necessary." Alara liked her at once, which meant she would be careful. When the room finally emptied, Kale remained near the table, with one hand resting on a document he had not signed. Rowan sat by the fire eating a pear Sarah had somehow produced, guarded by Tavin at the door. The boy was tired but steady. The gold had faded from his eyes. Alara approached Kale. "You chose Ven," he said before she spoke. "I chose the name that was there. It should have been mine." She looked at him sharply. He did not defend the sentence. After a moment, he added, "That was not accusation. No, it was regret. Men often confuse the two when speaking to the women who lived with the consequences." Kale absorbed that as if he meant to keep it. She wished he would stop doing that. It was easier when he was only absent. "I need to know something," she said. "Ask. If the court presses harder after the winter moon, will you choose law or blood?" His gaze held hers. "Neither." "That is not an answer. I will choose him." Alara's throat tightened. She hated that too. "And if choosing him costs you?" "Most things worth choosing do." It was the sort of line a king could say because the kingdom would make it sound noble later. Yet he said it with no grandeur, only weariness, and that made it harder to dismiss. Alara looked down at the parchment beneath his hand. "What is that?" "Recognition delay? What does it do?" "Prevents any faction from forcing Rowan into succession trials before I formally name him. You can do that?" "I am king." "You say that as though it answers everything." His mouth softened without amusement. "It usually does, in rooms where people lack your commitment to making my life difficult." Alara should not have felt warmth at that. It was nothing. A small ember, quickly covered. She turned toward Rowan. "We are going back to our rooms." Kale nodded. "I will walk you." "You do not need to." "No." He waited. Not command. Offer. Alara allowed it, because the corridors were unfamiliar, and because Rowan looked too tired to endure another stranger guiding him. Not because Kale's presence had become less threatening, not because she remembered his hand hovering before it touched nothing. They walked in a quiet line through the keep. Rowan carried his wooden wolf in one hand and held Elara with the other. After a while, he looked at Kale. "Do you have a mother?" Kale's steps slowed only slightly. "I did." "Did she make you toys?" "No." "Oh," Rowan frowned. "That is sad." "Yes," Kale said. "It was." Elara looked forward very carefully. Rowan swung their joined hands once. "Mama made my wolf when I had the coughing sickness. She stayed awake for 3 nights. "I know," Kale said softly. Elara glanced at him. "You do not know." "No," he said. "I meant I can see it." That was worse. Seeing was worse than ignorance, because ignorance had walls. Seeing entered through cracks. At their door, Rowan surprised all of them by turning to Kale. "Will you come for supper?" Elara went still. Kale did too. The question was plain. Child simple, impossible. Kale looked at Elara, not Rowan. She appreciated that, though appreciation was becoming an irritation. "This is Rowan's room," she said. "He may invite whom he wishes." Kale looked back at the boy. "If your mother permits it, yes." "I just did," Rowan said. "That is not the same thing." Rowan sighed with the weary patience of a child, surrounded by difficult adults. "Mama?" Elara could have refused. She almost did. Then she saw the way Rowan stood, tired and hopeful in his 2 large borrowed slippers, and understood that punishing Kale through absence might also punish the child who had begun asking questions. "One supper," she said. Kale inclined his head. "One supper." The first supper was awkward in the way of new bridges. Sarah sent up lamb stew with barley, roasted carrots, black bread, butter, plum preserves, and mint tea. Elara served Rowan first, then herself, and left Kale to take his own bowl, because she would not perform domestic gentleness for him merely because he had crossed a threshold. He seemed to understand. He sat in the chair farthest from Rowan's bed and ate like a soldier, quietly, with attention, not wasting a crumb. The detail unsettled Elara. She had expected kings to leave food unfinished. She had expected abundance to make men careless. Rowan did most of the speaking. He told Kale about Fenmere goats, about the pinecone soldiers, about Mara's warning that anyone who boiled cabbage too long had a suspicious soul. Kale listened gravely to all of it, asking questions at the right moments, never laughing when Rowan was serious. And then, Elder Merrick fell in the sheep trough, Rowan said, warming to the memory. "Accidentally?" Kale asked. Rowan glanced at Elara. Elara took a slow sip of tea. "Mama said I should not answer that." Kale looked into his bowl. "Wise." "It was not deep," Rowan added. "Comforting." Only his hat drowned. This time Kale did laugh. Not loudly, a brief, low sound that seemed to surprise him as much as anyone. Elara remembered that laugh younger. Then she stopped herself. Not younger. Gone. After supper, Rowan grew drowsy by the fire, his head nodding over the wooden wolf. Elara rose to put him to bed, but Kale stood first and lifted the empty tray. "You do not have to do that," she said. "I know." He carried it to the side table anyway, moving with the careful quiet of someone in a room where a child might sleep. The sight was too ordinary. That was its danger. A king lifting bowls. A father, though no one had given him the word aloud, making less noise than his boots wanted to make. Rowan looked up sleepily. "Will you come tomorrow?" Kale paused. Elara tucked the blanket around him. "If your mother permits," Kale said. Rowan looked at her. Elara adjusted the blanket with unnecessary precision. "We will see." Rowan accepted this as victory enough and closed his eyes. Kale left soon after. At the door he said, "Thank you." Elara answered, "Do not make too much of one meal." "I will try," but his voice suggested he already had. On the 3rd day, routine began without permission. That was how it entered, not as a decision, but as a series of small arrangements no one named. The physician came in the morning and checked Rowan by the fire, while Elara watched from the chair with her sewing in hand. Branwen arrived afterward and taught Rowan how to scent one thing at a time instead of letting the whole world rush into him. "Close your eyes," Branwen said, placing 3 cups on the table. "Tell me which has pine needles." Rowan sniffed the air and pointed. "Too fast. Again." "I got it right." "You guessed loudly. Skill is quieter." Elara, mending a torn cuff, hid a smile. Kale did not come until supper. He arrived with a knock that Rowan began to recognize by the end of the week. 3 taps, spaced evenly, never assuming entry. Sometimes he brought nothing, sometimes a book. Once a small knife with a blunt training edge, which Elara took from his hand before Rowan could touch it. "He is 7, she said. "I had my first blade at 5, and look how peaceful you became." Branwen, who had remained for tea that evening, made a sound into her cup. Kale looked almost embarrassed. Rowan leaned over the knife. "Can I keep it?" "No," Elara said. "Yes," Kale said at the same time. They looked at each other. Rowan whispered, "This is like counsel." Elara took the knife. "It stays with me until Branwen says you are ready." Branwen raised her brows. "Do not involve me in parental skirmishes before dessert." Kale's expression shifted at the word parental. Elara saw it and looked down. She was not ready for how the keep changed around them. Not publicly, not in law, but in small currents. Servants learned that Rowan liked his porridge with too much honey and that Elara preferred nettle tea to court blends. Sarah began leaving a basket of mending near Elara's chair without comment, as if understanding that idle hands were not restful for a woman who had survived by using them. Holt discovered Rowan liked riddles and began offering one each morning through the door. "What has teeth but never eats?" he asked on the 5th morning. "A comb," Rowan replied instantly. Holt groaned. "Too easy." "Your face was too easy," Rowan said, and then clapped a hand over his mouth, horrified. Tavin turned away, shoulders shaking. Elara closed her eyes. When Kale heard of it at supper, he looked at Holt standing outside the door and said, "A grave insult. Recover with dignity." Holt, red-eared, bowed. "Trying, sire." Rowan glowed with pride for an hour. Elara did not mistake these things for safety. She counted everything still. Who passed the corridor? Which servants watched too closely? Which nobles bowed to Rowan, and which refused to meet his eyes? Twice she found unfamiliar scents near the door after midnight, sharp with perfume and curiosity, and twice Taven confirmed that minor court ladies had been turned away before knocking. Kale did not minimize it. That mattered. It should not have mattered. On the 6th evening, he arrived late. Rowan had already eaten and fallen asleep with his wolf tucked beneath his chin. Elara was sitting by the hearth, mending the hem of her gray dress by lamplight, when the knock came softer than usual. She opened the door. Kale stood outside without his court coat, sleeves rolled to the forearm, hair damp from either snow or washing, his face drawn with fatigue. "You are late," she said. "I can go." That was the correct answer. She disliked how quickly he had learned them. "Rowan is asleep." "I know." "Then why come?" He looked past her, not into the room, but toward the warmth of it. "I do not know." The honesty was unwelcome. Elara should have closed the door. Instead, she stepped aside. He entered quietly and stopped near the hearth, looking at Rowan asleep on the bed. Something in his face loosened and hurt at once. "He asked twice," Elara said, before she could stop herself. Then pretended he had not. Kale nodded. "I was in council with the Eastern Pax. They want the announcement delayed beyond winter moon." "Because of Rowan?" "Because of me." She looked up. Kale's mouth hardened. "They think if I appear uncertain, every old bloodline with a grievance will test the borders. A hidden son looks like weakness to people who feed on exposed throats. He is not hidden now." "No. Do you regret bringing us?" The question came too quietly. Kale turned. No, she believed him. That was inconvenient. He moved to the low table, where Sarah had left a covered plate hours earlier. He lifted the cloth and found cold bread, cheese, and sliced meat. You did not eat, Alara said. I forgot. Kings forget food? Men do. The sentence sat between them, small and difficult. Alara threaded her needle. There is tea, she said. Kale looked at her as if she had offered more than hot water. He poured it himself. They sat without speaking while he ate, and she mended. The fire settled. Rowan slept. Outside the windows, snow slid from a roof somewhere in the keep with a soft hush. This, Alara thought, was how danger truly entered. Not by force, by quiet. By a man eating cold bread at her table, as though he belonged to no throne for 10 stolen minutes. By the steam rising from his cup. By the memory of his hand stopping before it touched their son. By the fact that her body remembered him not as a king, but as warmth beneath rain, breath near her temple, a voice in the dark saying her name, like something he had found rather than taken. She thought about 7 winters. She thought about one supper. She thought about how unfair it was that the heart did not keep accounts properly. You should sleep, she said at last. So should you. I am mending. That is not sleep. It is closer than worry. He looked toward the cloth in her lap. You still make stitches too small. Her fingers froze. It was such a specific memory that for a moment the room vanished and she was 19 in the healer's garden, stitching a torn sleeve while a wounded prince watched her hands. Alara drew the needle through. Small stitches hold. So do visible ones. Visible ones invite criticism. From fools. Fools are plentiful. Kale's gaze rested on her hands. They were plentiful then too, he said. She did not answer. He set down his cup. I looked for you after the war. Alara's needle slipped and pricked her finger. A bead of blood rose bright against her skin. Kale moved instinctively, then stopped. Always stopping. She put the finger in her mouth, tasting iron. No, she said. His voice was low. Yes. I stayed in Fenmere. I was told you married a cooper and left for the coast. The room tilted in a small, sick way. Alara lowered her hand. Who told you that? A court messenger. Dead now. Convenient. I believed it because I was 24, arrogant, wounded, and certain that anyone with sense would choose a life without me, if given the chance. There was no self-pity in it. That almost made it bearable. Alara stared at the fire, not abandoned, misinformed, not discarded, lost. No, she would not do that. She would not take one sentence and let it rearrange 7 years into something gentler than they had been. You stopped looking, she said. Yes, the admission did not ask forgiveness. It deserved none yet. You should have looked harder. I know. You should have come yourself. I know. You should have known. Kale closed his eyes. Yes. There was nothing more useful to say. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Rowan turned over in his sleep and murmured something about drowned hats. The sound saved them. Alara tied off the thread, with hands steadier than she felt. It changes nothing. Kale opened his eyes. No. But they both knew that was not entirely true. Not forgiveness. Not trust. But the story had shifted under her feet, and she hated him a little for arriving late with a truth that did not heal, only complicated the scar. On the 9th evening, Rowan asked Kale to tell him a story. Not a royal history, not a battle. A small one, Rowan said. Mama's stories are small. Kale looked at Alara for translation. She means stories where no one conquers anything before bed. I am he. What? You said she. Rowan frowned. Mama said I was a pup. Pup can be he. Oh. Rowan yawned. A small story. Kale sat beside the hearth, not too near the bed. When I was young, he began, there was a kitchen cat at Blackthorn named Oathbreaker. Rowan's eyes opened wider. Why? Because he swore loyalty to every person holding fish. Alara looked down at her sewing. Kale continued, voice even and low. Oathbreaker feared nothing. Not guards. Not hounds. Not my father. He once slept on the council table during a border dispute and refused to move for 3 hours. Did they let him? They negotiated around him. Rowan looked delighted. Was he king? Many suspected so. The story went nowhere grand. The cat stole trout. The prince was blamed. A cook cried. A visiting lord sat on a hairball. Rowan laughed until he had to hide his face in the blanket. Alara watched Kale tell a child a story about a treacherous cat, and for one moment, grief opened inside her, not like a wound, but like a room. This was what had been missing. Not wealth, not protection. This. A low voice near bedtime. Another memory for Rowan to carry. Someone to answer the questions Alara could not answer without bleeding on them. She looked away before Kale could see, but he saw too much already. That night, after he left and Rowan slept, Alara stood before the window overlooking the inner garden. Snow lay over the paths in soft ridges. The bowl of pine cones sat on the mantel. The chipped blue mug waited beside the teapot, out of place among all this careful richness, and therefore more precious than anything else in the room. She touched its scratched side. Royal claws had marked the glaze. Her son's fear had marked it. Her hands had carried it from the cottage, because some part of her had understood that survival needed witnesses. On the 11th night, the first true test came quietly. Alara found the note beneath the tea tray. It had been folded once, without seal, written in a hand too elegant to belong to any servant who carried breakfast. Unmarked women do not keep kings. Hidden pups do not become heirs. Leave before winter moon, and he may live nameless. Alara read it twice. Then she held it over the candle flame, until the paper blackened, curled and became ash. She did not wake Rowan. She did not call for Kale. Not at first. She washed the soot from her fingers, braided her hair, and sat beside her son's bed until morning light thinned the windows. When Kale came with the physician, he saw her face and stopped at the threshold. What happened? Alara rose, crossed the room, and held out the corner of paper she had saved, the only part not burned. One word remained. Nameless. Kale took it. His expression did not change. That was how she knew someone would suffer. Alara, he said softly, why did you burn it? Because I did not want Rowan to see. Why did you not send for me? She looked at him then. Because fear delivered to a king becomes politics before breakfast. His gaze held hers for a long moment. Then he nodded once. May I handle it? No. His brows drew together. Alara lifted her chin. You may investigate it. You may punish whoever threatens my son. But you will not handle this as if I am furniture in the room where decisions are made. A pause. Then Kale handed the paper back to her. What do you want? The question was simple. No one in Fenmere had asked it. Alara closed her fingers around the burned scrap. I want to know who wrote it. I want them kept away from Rowan. I want no public panic before winter moon. And I want to sit in the room when you decide what happens next. Kale looked at her, as if something inside him had just settled into place. Granted, he said. Behind him, Branwen's voice came from the corridor. Well, she said, this morning has teeth. Alara turned. The old hunt marshal entered without waiting for ceremony, took the burned scrap from Alara's hand when it was offered, and studied the remaining stroke of ink. Court hand, Branwen said. Educated, female or vain male, likely both dangerous. That narrows very little, Kale said. It narrows enough to begin. Branwen looked at Alara. You afraid? Yes. Good. Fear tells the truth before pride edits it. Alara glanced toward Rowan, still asleep, his lashes dark against his cheeks. I do not want him raised inside threats. Branwen's face gentled, though only slightly. No child is raised outside them. The work is teaching him which doors lock and which hands hold. Alara looked at Kale. His eyes were on Rowan. Not XY, not the man who had left, the man who had come. She hated the distinction. She needed it. That afternoon, the guard doubled outside their rooms. Sarah changed the serving rotation. Tavin searched the corridor, with the focused pleasure of a man finally given something suspicious to do. Holt looked personally offended that someone had slipped a note past him and spent the next 2 hours examining tea trays as though they had betrayed him. Rowan noticed the tension, of course. "Did something happen?" he asked. Alara was folding his shirts by the hearth. "A coward wrote a letter. To me? To us. What did it say?" "That cowards are poor writers." He thought about this. Was it Elder Merrick? No. Lord Carden?